Okay, so can we share the screen?
Yes.
Just start.
Yeah. Oh, let me get,
No,
yeah, 1 second. Let me make you a host. Okay, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Okay, so I'm sharing screen right now. And see it, it's okay? Okay, just start.
Yes, go for it. Ooh. Yeah, you're all set.
Okay. So, hello to everyone. We're doing our session from campus to Knesset of SSDP Israel. I'm here with Bini and Shaun, who will just who will introduce themselves. So generally, we're gonna talk about how we get from our campus to the Israeli parliament, which is called the Knesset, specifically to the drug committee of the Knesset. We'll talk about different achievements that we did get to them through this process. We will talk about our vision, and we will invite you to talk with us or think with us about how you can do the change in your region. So we'll start with a brief introduction. I'm Mikhail Hoffman. As I said, I'm the head of SSDP Israel. SSDP Israel is divided to two main chapters, the BGU, Ben Gurion University of the Negev, which is in the south of Israel, and another chapter in Tel Hai, which is in the very north of Israel. We collaborate with each other, but our work is in some way divided because we are about 300 kilometers apart, but we're doing a great job together. And now Shaun will explain about himself and Ilsam.
My name is Shaun Lacob. I have my master's in applied educational psychology, which is counseling. My background is as a youth worker. And I started working with psychedelic users when we started a project known as Good People, which is similar to the Sensible project you have in the US, or Cosmic Care at the Boom Festival, or other types of psychedelic harm reduction in festivals and nature parties. From there, I went and I did 5 years in India working with backpackers, which was a lot more harm reduction before and after. When I came back, I joined ILSAM, which is it belongs to the Doctors Union, and it is the addiction specialists. So it is the professional body that deals with drug use in Israel. I'm also a member of what's known as the Safe Zone Forums, the Forum of Safe Zones, which is the three Zendo-type projects that work together, which is part of the way that we got into the Knesset.
Thank you. And Pini will now explain about the Israeli Psychedelic Society.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pini. I'm a social worker and a drug policy advocate. In the past few years, I've been working together with Mikhail and Shaun and other fellow harm reductionists on creating kind of a network between the different organizations and the different aspects of the psychedelic scene in Israel. Today, I'm mostly interested in working on guiding some of the SSDP students in the Tel Hai chapter with their community work, which is part of what we're going to talk about today, as well as different efforts to change drug policy in the Knesset and in other spaces. And I'm very excited to be here.
Okay, this is just another explanation about the ILSAM. The drug committee, Shaun, will tell us a little more about the drug committee.
The Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, has a committee who's pretty much in charge of the issue of drugs and addiction in Israel. Until recently, it's been considered not very well ranked committee, and until this last government, for a long time, it was in the hands of politicians that weren't members of the government. But they're in charge of policy and law. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you explain more about the Tel Chai chapter and what you're doing there?
Yeah. So, as part of the efforts in Tel Chai College in the past year and a half or so, we've been building. We have a chapter with about I think 8 to 10 students that are active on campus. Of course, because of COVID this year, a lot of the work has been done virtually. Besides that, we have 4 students who are social work students who are doing their community work placement as part of this effort, as part of SSDP. And they're organizing different activities and things for students on campus and for people from the area in Tel Chai, in the north of Israel. The chapter is run by a student in Tel Chai, No. He's not here with us today, but he's doing an amazing job up there, and I'm kind of helping with the more educational side of the community work. We've been doing some projects for the students, but we also collected data from about more than 250 students, and we've used this data in ways to create some conversation about different drug use happening during COVID, students' drug use that's a bit different from what we're used to in different scenes. And we've also brought some of this data into the committee in the Knesset and to show, as part of the research committee, which we're going to talk about, that there's not enough information and we don't have relevant information. So this was kind of a kickstart for the committee to start and plan what kind of research we need.
Thank you. Yes, and about the collaboration.
So the 3 of us are very used to talking about these issues because we've been working together, like I said, together with other partners and colleagues. And I think there's something very special about the psychedelic scene in Israel and also the way SSDP is involved inside it, that we're basically a pretty wide coalition working together for changing drug policy, for advancing more sensible perspectives inside the drug policy. And like you'll see in the following slides, from the beginning of our efforts in the past years, and we've been working together and we've been supporting each other. So it's also part of the way we're acting on this scene as well.
Okay. Now we'll switch to how we got here. So, Shaun?
Okay. Psychedelic use in Israel pretty much started with the import of the Goa trance scene in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s. Israel has a mandatory military service, and after military service, a large number of our youngsters have been going to India. We're talking about 30,000 people a year for the last, about 30 years now. And that's the way that, so the trance scene and psychedelics have been woven into each other for a long time. But it's been about 10 years. Every once in a while, the police go and start a new war on drugs and stuff, and that often filters into the trance scene. for about 10 years, they've been having a pretty hard war on drugs. And as a result, the trance scene has moved further and further underground, further and further away from population centers, more into nature and much harder to find. And what that means is that, as you know, when taking psychedelics in a party scene, you have a higher risk of things like dehydration, heat stroke, especially given that most of our parties are being held during the summer, which in Israel can get really hot. And I think on average it works out about once a year there's someone who dies in a party. And then what happened was 4 years ago we had a soldier that had died in the party. When the newspapers picked it up, one of the things that they pushed very hard was that she died of something that could have been treated. The Knesset then called a meeting of the civil bodies and civil organizations to try and see how to prevent that, and came out with a very strong instruction to create an interministerial committee. But then, as often happens with Israel, politics got involved, the government collapsed, we went back into elections. We're a very democratic country. We have elections very, very often. So we went into elections and nothing actually happened for 2 years. Until 2 years later, there was a new Knesset drugs committee. This time, for the first time, was by a member of Knesset who not only believes in harm reduction, but she was also from one of the government running parties. And they called again the meeting and they brought the same people, and they realized that they were exactly where they were 2 years ago and that nothing had actually happened while the Knesset was sleeping. And this time she called for the committee to once more be established. And she did something that they hadn't done before, which was a month later, she wanted to know what had actually happened. And she demanded action and that things would happen. So from this the picture on there is of Ariel Safir, our last victim from 2 years ago. I'd like to say the last victim of the war on drugs, I hope. And when we're talking about the interministerial committee, we're talking about the people that are responsible for the issues of drug use and addiction, from the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Social Services, the Ministry of Community Strength, Education, Ministry of Education, the police force are in there as well. Although they're not quite as liberal as most of the other people that are sitting around. But one of the things that really came up was when the committee was asked for the answers, or when the ministries were asked for the answers, and they found that they didn't have anything because no one was really keeping a tab on what's happening with psychedelics. Psychedelic users weren't into the hospitals enough to even be records. They couldn't tell. They weren't being arrested enough. The police couldn't tell how much was being used. And that's where the NGOs, the civil society came into the picture to fill in the details that were missing. Together with the fact that the Israeli ministries seem to be ready for harm reduction as a general principle, and in favor of it, and are kind of being held back by the law. Suddenly, when everyone was talking about the need for harm reduction and it had come from up top, it started and started going through. In fact, it went so through that we've been talking for the last 6 months, 1 year. Even though the government has fallen and we've gone back to another set of elections, okay, and there is no thing. We're at the point where the people are committed to doing the work so that when the next committee is formed, they have the recommendations, they have the report ready that they can give it.
So, yeah. Wait, I want to explain a bit about how did we actually gather, about the invitation itself. Do you want to explain how we actually got inside? It was, okay, I will say that the first committee, the invitation for the first committee was actually open, so we can get into the beginning. And in the end of the first committee, there was an invitation from one of the main collaborators of the committee to all the people that wants to get involved into special teams that will came with a kind of policy and recommendation to how to handle open air parties. And then we got into those teams, allocated to those different teams. So there are 5 main teams of the drug committee that works on the open air parties. They are research, policy, advocacy, training, and standards. And we are all 3 in different committees. I think we're all in policy, and each one of us in different other teams. So we started to work inside of those teams, and we got into, I don't know, maybe each team have gone through 6 meetings till now. The one team that actually finished its work is the research team, and Pini will explain that in the accomplishments. So we'll now talk a little bit about the gap and harm reduction in Israel. Shaun.
Okay, harm reduction isn't a new principle in Israel, but like many countries, we started with harm reduction with people who are injecting. And the first project that was started was a needle exchange project, which has been going for, I think, maybe 10, 15 years, I don't remember. And they are looking to make in the beginning, of course, it went through an incredible amount of objection. It's become so established that they are now looking to a step up for safe injection rooms. And that's the next step that they're trying to get through.
So this is like the seeds of harm reduction, and these are the first steps.
That was the seed of harm reduction. That was where the Ministry of Health got behind harm reduction. I think they were doing that before they started with the methadone substitution programs, which is another thing that is done in Israel. There is an attempt to reduce barriers to treatment for people who continue to use drugs. Although many of the programs still require abstinence and drug testing to be part of the programs, there is more of an intent or an effort to provide services to people who are still using. Okay, and that's on the opiates scene.
There is
That's the next one.
Okay.
On the psychedelic scene, if that was mainly started by the establishment on the psychedelic scene, it started as more of grassroots things. Good People was, I think, the first project that was started seriously. On the other hand, when we started Good People, one of the things that we did was we started it together with the biggest NGO, the biggest non-governmental organization that works with youth and young people in Israel. So it was automatically taken up, it was after 2 parties. It was taken up by an established association with a good track record that was known for dealing with young people in questionable situations. And that gave it an air of legitimacy. Probably also part of the reason why Good People and the Forum for Harm Reduction Radicals was invited into the first Knesset meeting.
Just to say that there are a few more safe zone establishments in Israel, except of Good People, and they are working in different waves. But Good People, it's very important to say that it's part of an NGO, as you said, yes. And the others are part NGO, part private.
Yeah, it means they have the defense and the backing of a well-established association with their legal team and with everything that's involved in it.
Amy.
So I'm going to speak a little bit about where the perspective, mostly of the government officials, but also of some of the public, is being shifted in the past maybe 2-3 years, and especially through our work inside the government committees. Excuse me. When we started the conversations in between the committees with the officials, most of the perspectives we were facing were very much old school. I wouldn't say that they were drug users, but they were definitely anti-drug use, and the tolerance and willingness to listen to harm reduction efforts that are focused on the drug users without the legal side of penalties and punishment was very little. I think in the past 2 years or so, through this conversation, I'm sorry to say, through some of the victims which we've had to suffer on the way, and also through some of the kind of upgrading our work and bringing it up a step, bringing it from the streets and from raves into the parliament, into the academia, into research, into civil society scene. I think that's making a difference slowly, and we can hear today government officials, whether it's even from some of the police officials, but it can be mostly from the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of Welfare or the Ministry of Education. We can hear that they're really interested in our perspective. They're really interested in learning what other efforts in the world they're doing right now to treat this issue. And I think that we've kind of placed ourselves in a place where we can offer our knowledge or our perspective in a way that's accepted. And I think that's a kind of big shift.
Thank you. So now we will record our achievements so far. The first is to talk with you about our achievements in science. Any start with what is going on with your teams?
Okay, so each of us is sitting in different teams under the committee. One of the teams I'm placed in is the research team. Basically, the research team was tasked with planning the needed research, the needed information, the needed relevant information for understanding drug use in Israel, understanding drug users in Israel, and also understanding how the government or the civil bodies can assist and reduce the harm and the victims. Inside the team, we had a nice collection with some people from academia, some people who have vast experience in running research for government bodies, as well as myself and other representatives from harm reduction efforts. I think the work has gone very well, especially since everyone was very much motivated to get things done and to get things moving. I think it was a privilege of this team that we had to deal with data, not with perspective. So once we're dealing with data, it's pretty easy to get people on board and to decide how we're going to do the research. On some of the other teams, it's been more complicated. We've been faced with stigma and taboo, of course, as anyone is in the scene. And we've had to kind of educate ourselves as well as educate the different officials on the way, both with what kind of efforts we can bring to the table and also how to deal with each other, how to deal with the government demands or wants. So I think we're learning a lot about how to play with the intricate Israeli kind of policy change that is needed. And I think that we're working in very nice cooperation so far with bodies that maybe 2 years ago we wouldn't have believed that they'd have this discussion with us. Maybe something about the other teams?
Yes, I would like to say that inside of the training team, we have built different kind of syllabuses that will allocate different training to different people inside of the open air parties scene. So we thought about specific training to the producers themselves, specific training for police forces and also emergency units that will help them to understand how to treat people in those situations. Also specific training for the harm reduction and the safe zones. So there is an ongoing work on the different kind of training that will be, but we are now at the point of we build it and just need to start to maybe doing the first pilots of those training. In the standards team, we mostly thought about different standards for parties that are up to 500 people, parties that are considered small parties, parties that are from 500 to about 2,000 or 1,000, which was it?
I don't, we haven't quite decided, I don't think, and I don't think it really matters. The thing of the standards is to bring the parties from underground up above ground, and make it easier for people to have licensed, responsible parties that meet all the safety requirements.
Basically, to try and ease the regulation and to make the production of these parties in a safe way manageable for the production.
Also, one thing that I really want to say that it's very important that the other persons inside of the teams, mostly from the different ministries, asked us to bring our knowledge to the discussions inside the teams. So we have, as the Psychedelic Society, did a few short lectures to the other personnel of the teams to make this a common language of harm reduction and of what substances are doing to what people and what are the different numbers of harm that it's made and harm that could be prevented. So we are now leveling together at basically a really needed level of knowledge to speak about how we can continue doing this process. So this is about the different teams inside academia.
So I'm going to talk a bit about, like I said before, through the Tel Chai College chapter, about the way we're bringing some of the policy change and the perspective shift from the grassroots, from the students into academia. This year I've had the privilege to guide 4 students from the social work school in Tel Chai, doing their community placement as part of the SSDP work with harm reduction efforts with students. And I think that the ripple effect that they've had just by affecting their peers and their staff, the academic staff, and just having 150 people come in for a lecture about how to treat people in psychedelic situations and different that we're doing, we're affecting much more than just the students themselves and just more than the chapter and the students that are active inside the chapter. I think that the fact that we've been able to put drug policy change as a social work effort inside the training is something that's is a nice achievement. I think that we can find different ways to bring SSDP kind of material into education, into social work, into psychology, into different aspects through students, and through the students to affect also the staff and also the kind of people who are deciding and are thinking about new research, who are putting out policy and academic recommendations for how to behave and what to do with these kind of situations. So I think that besides the effect that we're having as harm reduction per se, we're having a very nice policy and the perspective shift as well.
Thank you. And I will say, and Shaun, you will continue a little bit about the achievements that are outside. I will say that me and Shaun have been in, we did a lecture together that we got into after we made a connection with a high rank person inside of the Ministry of Welfare, yes. And we did a lecture about harm reduction to a great audience of about 200 social workers that are working for the government inside the Ministry of Welfare. And we got amazing feedbacks. And it's like a small change, and it's only one lecture, but it's really shifted the mind for so many people inside the government. And so this is in one scenario. I want to say another scenario that me and Pini did another lecture in a meeting of a Facebook group that I'm also running, and this is kind of a shift that we are doing for the audience themselves, that like I'm saying, that the more open air parties audience, different kinds of different talks that go inside Facebook groups and WhatsApp groups and between people, and you can really see the shift and the change in the different terms that people are using when they are replying to different posts, that people like asking questions about should I do this and should I do that, and people are really providing evidence-based and knowledge-based responses. Also, we're doing it all the time inside of those groups, but you can really see the shift in the audience. Shaun, you want to do more on this?
Not too much. I think we're in kind of a unique situation where, because we are a relatively small country that speaks a very unique language, it becomes a lot easier to do it. There are essentially two big Facebook groups for psychedelic users. And what it took was a couple of responsible people in both of those to encourage that sort of discussion that has really changed the languages. I think the exciting thing about the lecture that we did at the Ministry of Welfare was that it was the head of addiction that had presented us as providing them with a fresh perspective on an area that they don't usually deal with. Because as addiction workers, almost none of them come into contact with psychedelic users. So we have this. We're also a country that really likes education and that sort of stuff. So conferences get organized. We've had conferences that were organized by civil society. There was a conference from the neurobiological psychiatrists, so I don't remember how it was, but the ones that usually work on medicines, that did one on psychedelic therapy. That whole idea of the conference, the lectures, the getting to know, the talking, is very much a part of the way we're working here.
Yeah, another space all three of us are active in are integration spaces, which are popping up in Israel in the past 2 years, mostly due to some of our efforts. And besides providing spaces for safe conversation about drug use and about psychedelic effects, we can also see the kind of communities forming around these circles or these groups, and I think that it's a very essential part of the setting that we want to allow people to have if they're going to use substances. So we can see that from the macro through the mezzo all the way down to the micro and into the personal, we have pretty much a shift from keeping things in the closet and trying to figure out things on our own to bringing the conversation out into the light and looking for more information, sharing support instead of isolating ourselves. So I think as a whole, on a harm reduction perspective, we can see that we've achieved a lot. Of course, there's a lot more left to do, always.
I think a lot of the reason why we've succeeded is because we've allowed the grassroots organization and activists to network, join together to find I'll call it the responsible, mature voice, the way to talk about psychedelics, which is not still tuning, yeah, okay. And that's also, and the other thing is I say we approach the establishment from a position of harm reduction, okay, where we don't try to impose on them our agenda, where we respect them, their efforts, their attitudes, we find the common ground for where we have the joint aims, and provide them with what they need so that they can do their work in a better way. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and now we'll speak about our vision. Shaun, so far.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that, but the word vision is a little too small, because we're talking about the vision of this project that started with the Knesset, okay, which is not just to offer the legislators the basis that they need to make the changes that will happen. We're trying to find specific places where what were previously underground raves and open-air parties can be held safely. To bring test kits on site with not just the police ignoring it, but with their approval and possibly even their support. The establishment of safe spaces as a given, that if you're going to be at a party where people are going to be using psychedelics, you are going to be expected to provide them with a safe space. Harm reduction materials, relevant information, relevant, useful, and accurate information, and non-biased. Okay, non-biased in both ways.
Non-judgmental and non-biased.
Yeah. And the idea of widespread cooperation, that grassroots workers can work with the health establishment, including the mental health establishment, okay, and with the social workers and with the users themselves.
So we are almost at the part that we want to ask you questions. We are now, we're now almost at the end of our session. We actually wanted to, each one of us will give the perspective of how we got to the Knesset and how we advise you to take part in changing policy and doing this change that is more wider than inside of campus. Each one of us will just give its perspective, and then we'll really like to answer your questions, or if you got an idea and you want to share it with us, we would really like to hear it. So we start.
Okay, so I wanted to say maybe two short things. One is embrace the path you're already on and find a way to make a difference with the path you're already on. So if you're in school and you're studying how to be a pharmacist, there's ways for you to make a change as a pharmacist. And if you're studying how to be a lawyer or a social worker or an educator, you can find the place where we as a community need, and find a place where your expertise and your knowledge can be of value. So we don't all have to be drug policy activists in the parliament. We can do this everywhere. We can do it on Facebook, we can do it in the street, we can do it in the way we use substances and the way we talk about substance use and about substance users. So I think the first thing that I wanted to say is find the way that what you're doing already can make an effect for people who use drugs and for drug use. The second thing I wanted to say is that I'm a big believer in community, and I think that a nice way to make a difference is to turn your group on campus, whether it's your SSDP chapter or your friends that are psychedelic informed, and create a small community, create a space where people can share experiences, where people can come together and discuss things in ways that aren't stigmatized and judgmentalized. And I think through making lots and lots and lots of small communities, we can really make grassroots change. Of course, if you live in a democracy, go to parliament, take part in whatever is open for you as a citizen, make your stand and put out your voice wherever it's accepted and wherever it's legal and wherever it's important to do. And I think that we don't really have to become full-time activists to make this change. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Penny. I want to say also that you can start making change inside of, let's say, academia by doing research. If you're, let's say, taking part of a course in statistics and you have to do a job about an academic work about analyzing different kinds of data and collecting data by yourself. So you can do a questionnaire and collect data inside of your campus about the different kind of drug use or even drug abuse, and then use this data to talk with your, let's say, university decanate, it's also the university staff, and to show them what is going on. And you're just doing it for a course, as it's like an obligation that you have to do, but you are using this obligation to do a real change in the real world and not just doing these things that you are obligated to. Also, as Pini said, you can look about what's going on inside your parliament, but also I want to say we're living here in Israel, it's like smaller cities, but I guess that where some of you guys are living, there is a very big cities and it's a very big municipality, and maybe you have your own drug committee inside of your municipality, and maybe you can go there and ask them where can you stand up and raise your voice about what's going in your neighborhood or what's going on in your campus. The real thing that I really want to say to you about how to make this change beyond campus, it's networking and making connections. We are really strongly connected from different things that we are doing as activists. Later on we became friends, but it started from taking action. So, and on the way we meet more and more people that are also activists, and it's very common that different activists has very similar kind of way of thought about how to make change, and then you make this coalition, then the change is more easily done. So go and meet people and do your change together. That's how it's done. Thank you.
I stand behind what they said, and the only thing that I think I'd add is if you want to make a change, learn who it is that you want to make a change. Learn who it is. Learn who it is that you're sitting opposite from. Learn their language. Learn what's important to them. Because that's the way that you're going to make a change. We won't convince the Ministry of Health that drug use is a personal rights issue. But we can convince the Ministry of Health that they can deal with drug use much better than the police can.
As a health
issue. As a health issue. Okay. And when you speak to everyone about what's important to them, we won't convince the police that these are crimes that should not be prosecuted. We may be able to convince the police that there are better ways for them to police drug users. Okay, that will get them better results. And I think that's the key when you want to make a change is learn the language. In the same way that as a harm reduction, it made a huge difference when I understood that people before they went to a trance party, and I'd say to them, make sure you drink because you don't want to get dehydrated. People dehydrate when when they're at these parties, and sometimes it can be fatal. And once I changed it and I started saying, listen to your body and drink as much as you need because it'll make you feel much better. Suddenly people came back and said, wow, that really helped me. The reason it really helped was because when people were at parties on drugs, the last thing they wanted to think about is what can go wrong. The first thing they thought about is what will make me feel better. Use those same techniques in anyone that you're trying to encourage to make a change in a healthy way.
Thank you, Shaun. Hey, do we got any questions?
Yeah.
Or
Yes,
anything
hello.
from-
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so I have some audience questions here. The first one is from Olin Davis. What do you think SSD peers who would like to replicate the success of SSDP Israel should focus on when initially engaging with policymakers?
Okay, so I will start and then I will let you also to answer. I think that the very, very first thing is to make a common language and common ground. Not to come from a place of like, I know better than you, and you are just totally, let's say that you're representing the war on drugs, while I'm representing the other side. I think that the first thing that it's very, very important is to make the common language and the common ground, and to be in this kind of way of
Offering.
Yes, offering information, offering maybe those kinds of small lectures that we did. Being in this place of offering collaboration, not saying you have to hear me, but to offer this. And this is how we make this common ground.
Yes. I would like to add something that taps into what Shaun said before, that if you want to start making change, learn who you're going to deal with. Learn who are the people who are in charge of these committees. Learn who you can affect and who is closer to you already. I think that there are many ways to reach someone's heart regarding drug use and substance use. Even if it's the most conservative, old school politician, you can still find a way to talk about harm that's done and about the ways to minimize it. I think that's a very, very basic common ground when we start this discussion. It's sad to say, like I said before, but I think definitely for me, 4 years ago, I barged into a committee meeting because I lost a friend for rave. And I was a pissed off young social worker and I wanted to hear answers. And then I realized that by demanding to hear answers, I'm not listening to the fact that no one knows anything. And maybe if we start and talk together about what's going on, how have other places dealt with this issue, what are new, fresh perspectives that we can bring to the table. So basically, forget what you think you know and learn about the situation that you're trying to affect.
Yeah, I think he's got to think of finding what motivates the person that's sitting opposite you. Again, as long as there's respect between people, they don't have to agree on the reason to agree on an action.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Roisin, and she asks, how has it felt being a young person liaising with the government? Did you face any challenges related to this?
Okay, I'm youngest, so I'll start. I'm 29 and I've been in the committees in the past 4 years, so I guess that means 25 was when I first walked in there. I think the age and the experience is a nice factor, usually, but when we're talking about harm, when we're talking about victims, I think that just the fact that my face is a young face and it resembles the kind of people who are getting hurt behind the scenes and the kind of people who are being affected by the policy. So that was kind of a plus on my side. Another thing is that, as we know, the war on drugs it's kind of a long story already, and the kind of people who are sitting in seats of power right now haven't really refreshed their thoughts in maybe a couple of decades sometimes. So sometimes just, sitting there as a person who can be their son or their grandson and talking about what my generation feels and what my generation needs, and reminding them that my generation has the power to vote, and reminding them that my generation in 20 years from now will be the kind of people who are sending kids into education systems and caring about these kind of things. So I think being young in this place is kind of a big plus, as long as you treat people in front of you with respect and not as if they owe you too much. Yeah.
I would say that it's sometimes scary, but after the first two meetings, I really feel that we got connected to the different personnel inside of the teams, and we found common ground. And after you find the common ground, you are forgetting about this age differences. I think it's a little bit frightening at first, but after you start work inside of the teams, it's really, even after me and Shaun did the lecture, some personnel was like, yeah, well, when is the next open air party? We want to come. Yeah, tell us what's going on. And this is my perspective on this.
I'm not a young person.
Yeah, you're not a young person. Okay.
I'm already in my 50s. But what I would say is make sure that what you have to say is correct, is honest, is fair, and don't more than you actually need to. Okay, if you're out there to make a name and to make an impression, you're doing it wrong. Okay, if what you're saying is true, your age shouldn't matter.
I just want to throw out one more sentence. Since some of us got to what we're doing through psychedelic experiences, and some of us, discovered that the concept of time and age is kind of liquid, in a way. I think that when we come with an open and honest truth, age is not an issue, and experience is not an issue. It's about how we give the material over, how we open up the conversation in a way that's open for people. Once you have that, you can talk about anything forever. And in the end, if you discuss things for enough time in a good manner, you'll have some results. Even if you won't change the entire drug policy for the country, you might get, a safe zone in every party, or you might get drug testing kits available on the street. So small differences are very big differences here.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Jacob Shanyon. How did you find bridging the gap between psychedelic society and drug policy reformers?
I think that all of our psychedelic society are policy reformers. I think that this is what's happening in Israel, and I think that the psychedelic scene in Israel is also like it's intense. It's very spread, and it's very common. I think maybe it's only from our perspective as part of this society, but a lot of people in Israel are taking part of because military here is an obligation. So you are already in your 18s are doing something for the country and taking part of something. Maybe you become a commander, maybe not. Then you are going to India or to South America, and it's what they call the big trip. And inside of the big trip, many youngsters are trying their first experiences with different kinds of substances. So it's very widespread here to also take part in the army or doing something for the country, and then in some way make connection, and then trying different experiences, and maybe after this it's kind of connecting and going on further.
I just want to say that I think it's a very good question. It's something I'm trying to deal with since the beginning of the idea of the psychedelic society. I think we're lucky that the psychedelic scene in Israel is leading drug policy change. I mean, I'm putting cannabis aside because in Israel is going through maybe 10 years of reform efforts regarding cannabis. But the psychedelics harm reduction scene specifically has been very instrumental in bringing drug policy to light, bringing the disasters and the victims up into the light and the conversation into a wider conversation, one about harm reduction as a perspective, and also one about drug use, normalizing and destigmatizing drug use and drug users. I think that as a psychedelic society, when we kind of thought of this idea, we thought of it as a community. And part of this community is dealing with drug policy change, but part of this community is in pushing forward research or pushing forward harm reduction efforts, pushing forward businesses and organizations that have to do with the psychedelic scene or the drug use scene. And I think that it would be maybe a bit ignorant to try and change policy without creating a community around this.
Mm-hmm. And I think when you want to bridge two worlds, it's important to keep one leg in each. And that means that all of us also have a respectable profession from which we come. So we're not just talking as psychedelic users, we're also talking as youth workers and social workers and students, and that's not the only thing that we're bringing. And I think that also makes a really, really, really big difference.
Okay, thank you. And we have time for one more question, I think. Our last question comes from Alhaji Conte. How can one go about creating an open forum for people to come discuss without stigmatization in a society where people don't feel safe to discuss their ways of life out in the open?
So I'll jump on that one. First that I want to say is integration spaces or sharing circles or any other virtual or local conversation possibility. I think that there are different platforms you can use. I'm personally working with the Thank You Plant Medicine Coalition, which is a big Facebook group, on having integration rooms or sharing circles available for different time zones on Zoom, which are virtual spaces where you can come and share. I think there are some pretty good social media groups out there, and I think that if you look for the right kind of people, it's very easy to form these kind of groups on your own. The organic sharing space with people that you are used to using with is a really good space to discuss things with and to plan policy change or local change regarding this. I think we're a perfect example for this.
I think, create a space. Create a space, but create a space that is actually accepting, that really is not judgmental, that doesn't push people to accept a particular idea or a certain experience, that allows for a wide variety of things. If, for example, you're talking about an integration circle or a sharing circle, don't limit it just to people that have used classic psychedelics or psychedelic medicines. Include holotropic breath work. Or if someone comes and they say, listen, I really want to understand an experience I had I haven't yet had it, on heroin, on cocaine, or something like that, give them validation. Don't add your stigma to it. Accept them as something that is equal, even if it's not even if it's not you. Okay. I think if you want to break stigmas, break your own. Okay. Hope someone that wants to help. If we're working with psychedelics, help people that want to get harm reduction for opiate users, for people who are injecting. That's the way. That's like the stigma.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more sentence about shame. There's a lot of shame that comes with stigma and taboo, and I think that as activists or as users or just people who care about freedom and personal rights, I think we need to leave this shame at home and have courage when we face ourselves, when we face government, when we face students, when we face whoever it may be. Because we're very much used to thinking about ourselves, whether it's as users or as advocates for users, in a way that is, it's not beneficial anymore, and it doesn't always mirror the actual situation. When we go to the Ministry of Health, we see that sometimes we have more stigma or shame regarding certain substances or certain scenes. And I think that once we leave the shame behind and we come with courage and with an honest heart, there's a lot to be done, and it can be done very well.
I want to say the last thing about this, except of me facilitating SSDP Israel, I'm also facilitating and monitoring inside the Facebook group in Israel, which called the Psychedelic Talk. The group is now about 12,000 people, and they are speaking actually all day, like 6 posts a day about should I do this, or I want to go there, or I have this kind of issue, is it okay for me to take this or this or this? And it's called a secret Facebook group, so you have to get inside of this. And if you're creating a Facebook group or maybe a Telegram group, you can do it as a safe space of people that can come inside of the group and not feeling ashamed of somebody talking about what they're talking about, because it's held. And I think it's maybe the easiest way to start this kind of conversation. And they're inviting people inside of those digital spaces.
Okay, thank you so much. This was a really great session. Thank you for being here and sharing your success getting all the way to the Knesset. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice friends.
Bye.
Good evening. Bye bye.